Tell us a little bit about your general impressions of the nation of Israel. First impression.
First impression, very rocky.
The difference between how green and lush the northern part of Israel was, and just every kind of vegetation, and then you get to the south and just how rugged the terrain is. Makes you wonder how they could walk all that distance.
My first thought reminded me sort of Florida with all the palm trees and all the different colors. And I don't know, that's what I kept thinking. I didn't know what thought it was going to look like. I thought of Florida.
Well, I thought that the country was beautiful, especially when we were up on some of the mountains that looked like a patchwork down in the valley with the various colors of green. And driving through the country, I was very impressed at how they utilized every inch of the ground, and how through these years that God's promise has been kept to supply their needs.
You met a lot of people over there, both Israeli and Palestinian. Tell me how you felt toward them, how they treated you, what your impression of them was. I'll start with Dean.
Everybody that I personally came in contact with was very friendly, and when you stop and analyze the whole thing, they're after your buck.
That's right.
I was just amazed at the way they all tried to be friendly. They gave, like everyone else said, they were after your money. They had all their homemade good things, and most of their stuff was worth what they asked for. Of course, they started out at a great amount of money, and you could get it for $1 or $2 if you worked at them hard enough.
I thought the people were very kind. They are a different culture. They have different mannerisms. They speak differently, sometimes a little abrupt, but that's their culture. And I was pleased. And even though they did want our money, I realized that, you know, that's how they make a living, a lot of them. And so that really didn't bother me so much. I had the choice of giving it or not giving it. The thing that bothered me the most was the little big brown-eyed boy who followed me and wanted some money, and I just kept giving him a hug, and he really didn't want hugs. He wanted $1. And that's sad. And but you know, our guide and bus driver were great, and I was pleased with the way the people were.
My first impression was that they, for the most part, were very friendly. You could understand them really well, which shocked me. And there was a few rude dudes, I have to admit, that would crowd in line on you, which upset me a little bit to start with. And I talked to Gary about it. He said that's part of the culture. So I started just crowding in too. So it didn't work out all right. But the first thing I noticed, my buddy taught me how to be a trained observer. And you see pistolas everywhere, or some type of weapon, and that was kind of hard to get used to at first, but I felt safe all the time, with the exception at nightfall. But nice bunch of people to meet, really.
Mostly it happened in northern Israel, but so many people asked me where I was from, and when I would tell them, their immediate response was, "God bless America." It did happen once or twice in Jerusalem, but that was mostly in northern Israel. But then, in contrast, in Bethlehem, when we were standing on a corner waiting for the bus to come and pick us up, one of the street peddlers almost got right up in my face and started telling me, "We love Americans, we love Americans, but we do not like American government. American government is bad, White House is bad." And he started really preaching to me about that. And of course that was in the Palestinian area. A Muslim was doing that.
Well, I thought the people were all very friendly. Our guide and our bus driver, I mean, after a couple of days, it felt like family, you know, and they interacted. We all interacted, I think, really well. My biggest thing was their day-to-day, the security. Every time there was a wedding, you would look and there was somebody that was dressed slightly less. And if you looked closely, very closely, there was a low-profile sling over their shoulder. And when you walked past, you saw an M16 or a Uzi.
We touched a little bit on the safety issue, so let's get your opinions, and we'll start with Mick about you know, how you felt in terms of being safe, or were there places you didn't feel safe? Mick?
Okay, well, I felt relatively safe all the time, even when we crossed the border there and went to Jericho, and there was there's armed people all around, and I thought, well, you know, I still didn't feel unsafe, and I saw lots of M16s and Uzis and things like that everywhere, and handguns and places that you didn't expect them. And I remember the wedding party, and we went and we watched a little bit of the rehearsal or whatever it was for the wedding, and I noticed a guy over one side that had a rifle, and a young guy, and so later I asked him if he was with the wedding party or if he was security at the park where we were, and he said no, he was with the wedding party. So everybody has security, and that was an interesting thing, but I felt relatively safe. It didn't bother me.
With all the security and weapons and all, I never felt unsafe. I knew they were there for a purpose, and it was for protection, but I really did not feel uncomfortable. You got used to it.
I felt safe all the time we were there, and when we were in the Palestinian areas, we did have to do exactly what they told us to do.
During that trip, I didn't feel unsafe anytime, because if something's going to happen, it's going to happen. You can't do nothing about it.
Well, I never felt unsafe. I always felt safe. Thing of it is, I've been in countries where the weapons were more visible, and people took a closer look at you as you walked by, and with weapons.
I don't think I ever felt unsafe. I think the only thing that I kept thinking was that these guys carrying these Uzis were 18 to 21-year-olds. And I kept thinking about my kids when they were 18 to 21. But part of that I think might have been good, because I really think if there was an issue, they would have dealt with it. And, you know, I don't think I felt unsafe, though.
Israel, the only time I felt unsafe was the night we went to Bethlehem, and that was unnerving. It was, I think they almost did it because we were Americans and because they could, and to show us that they could. Maybe that was a wrong impression, I don't know. But
being there in Israel helped to strengthen your faith in God, or did it help to confirm your faith in the Bible and His Word? I mean, how did it affect you spiritually, I guess, is what I'm asking. And we're going to start back with Diane.
I thought that, you know, after reading the Bible and hearing during sermons and everything, it brought it to life. Like, we got to see it and see the Jordan River and see the walls of Jericho, and I mean, just all the stories. It's just amazing. So many people don't get to see it, they study it for years, and we had the opportunity to go see where Jesus walked.
It made the things I read in the Bible seem more real, and from now on when I read them, I'm going to have a picture in my mind. I will visualize almost everything because of knowing exactly what it looked like.
I agree with what everybody said. It brought the Bible alive to me, and it was really neat. You know, knowing we was walking where Jesus walked.
But most of all, when I stood and looked at the mountain where they had found the Dead Sea Scrolls and was told that in this area that Christ experienced this temptation. And what that meant to me, that I was standing in that area.
The whole trip was very emotional to me. I liked seeing the different things that was brought out of the Bible, and then seeing there's what they're talking about, and seeing that, and then when we actually got into where Jesus, they could almost say, yeah, He was right there. It was just overwhelming to me. I just really, I'd have to get off by myself a little bit and sit and think about it and regather, because it was very emotional, the whole thing.
I thought the whole trip was very interesting, made the Bible more real. And it helped me to understand more about the Bible.
Well, I feel that it was very educational as far as Bible, because there it is. When they say, it happened here, we were here.
I think like a lot of people said, it really did bring it alive, and
I think that if you were not touched by this visit to Israel, that you are dead. And I would just love to see young people go and visit Israel at an early age, you know, where they understand, and even our younger adults, because it will help them in their study of the Word and to feel the touch of our Lord and Savior.
well, just that there were several places that you just knew that you couldn't have been a better place, because that was where Jesus had been. And one thing in particular, when I read part of the scripture of the Beatitudes, the part that I just happened to read had been the lesson I just taught my 4- and 5-year-olds the week before.
If you had to narrow it down to one or two things, places, events, describe for us the most important one or two that was the most meaningful part of the trip to you. All right, and I think we're ready to start with Dean.
Yeah, okay. Gosh, narrow it down. That's hard. I know I talked to Gary about a lot of the different places that we were there, and where Jesus confirmed with Peter that, you know, after he had denied him 3 times, and it was just every place. It's hard to narrow it down to one or two, but every place that we was at, it was just fantastic.
What about being baptized? Was that important to you?
Oh yeah, that was, I didn't even cross my mind about that one. That was.
Goes without saying.
Yeah, you know, I would go in that direction. That was my entire trip, to have Gary do that for me there in the river, and that was quite an experience. That just put my whole trip right into one pile. That was just great.
I believe the baptism would stand at the top of it all, because that was very moving to stand there, and it wasn't so much me being baptized as to watch the other people being baptized, and I think now that is the way it was back then. And so, no, I feel that the baptism should be pretty well top of my list.
The baptism was very, very touching to me, and all of the beautiful churches, and knowing that those churches are basically the same as they were then. And the tomb, the garden tomb, that was just awesome.
Well, I think I have to agree with everybody about the baptism, but I think another really big thing was to actually sit on the steps where Jesus preached, that they actually had excavated down to these steps that were there, and I think that was just really a high point.
Well, one of the things that I guess it really got me was the place of the crucifixion, and the skull that there was actually, you could visualize it in the hills before they destroyed part of it, the pictures that they had. And that was an impressive thing to me, to see how rough the terrain was and how cruel that whole area looked. My feet hurt a lot at the time too, and I appreciated the fact that of all this pain that he went through for us.
Probably one or two things. First of all would be, it's been mentioned before, is the Sea of Galilee, just to realize how many times Jesus was on the sea, how he walked on the waters, how he was in the boat preaching to the people on the shore from the water. how Peter jumped out of the boat and walked to Jesus on the water, and then we were on the Sea of Galilee. That just was very moving. But probably even more than that was being at the Garden Tomb, and even though there's an alternate site, just seeing Golgotha. And even though they don't know that that was a tomb that was so much like a garden tomb where he would have been, and what was so exciting is the fact that it's an empty tomb. And, you know, I sat there and looked at that and just realized he is not here, he's risen. And that was just the focal point of the whole thing. He isn't there, he's risen.
Well, it's like everybody said, it's hard to narrow this trip down, period. But I'd have to say rededication was very special. I'd done it privately with my family, and I wanted to redo it publicly, and I couldn't think of a better place to do it than that. The other special time for me was when I read scripture up on the mountain overlooking the Jezreel Valley. Very special to me.
I think like a lot of people said, my favorite place I believe was the Sea of Galilee, and I also enjoyed when we read scriptures, and it's just hard to pick one thing. I'm like Bob, it's all sort of mumble jumbled in my head, and I'll get it all straight one of these days.
Well, probably one of the top for me was the being baptized in the Jordan River. You know, that puts a lot of perspective on things.
All right, so we go from the emotional, let's go to the sublime. What would things that happened that were amusing or funny? All right, things that just kind of tickled you a little bit. Mick, how about you?
Okay, one thing, it probably, I'm not sure everybody even saw this, but at some of the gift shops, I found a humorous t-shirt for sale. It said, "Don't worry, America, Israel is behind you." And I thought, a country the size of Israel is going to be behind us to support us and everything. But you think about it, and they have to have that kind of an attitude if they're to survive. They've got to think that they're the biggest, the best, and they're ferocious. And everybody should know that. So I know sort of what they were saying, but it still was kind of funny to me.
I have to say the camel rides and witnessing Marvin getting up on the camel was definitely a funny thing to see.
Thank you, Diane.
No problem.
Marvin was top on my list too. Seeing him on top of a camel is pretty hilarious.
I have lots of funny things, but that's just who I am. But the funniest thing was when we were all in the public toilet, and we all, sit on, how we had the slab for each, and we were all sitting there. That was hysterical to me. But I think we were all really tired, and I looked around, there we all were. And then what was really funny was how we talked later about how it was really neat that, that you really got to know your friends and your neighbors and your family when you all shared the big toilet room with the little slabs. That was really funny. Yeah, the big T. The big T. That was funny to me.
We might want to explain that was visiting ancient ruins of
really
a public toilet, and it wasn't one that was in use. We weren't using it.
Well, I missed Marvin on the camel. I would have given a month's Social Security check for seeing it. But I'd have to say him being a camel jockey was about the best thing going.
I'm glad you missed it. I think probably the best thing that I had was I was saying mercy a few times on the bus, and our bus driver got saying it, and he said it's so funny he couldn't help but laugh.
I feel that my personal time that I had the biggest laugh or whatever was when I went to the Dead Sea, and I got out there and I decided to sit down like they said, and I sat down, and everybody thought I fell. Well, maybe I did a little.
Yeah.
And that wasn't as funny as it was when I decided to get up. I think Bob helped push my feet down, and somebody else helped pick my shoulders up, and they stood me up in that water. Because I was helpless. I was absolutely helpless. I just, you know.
I think the funniest part was Big Bad Johnny, our bus driver, and Marvin did say mercy a lot, and he sat right behind the bus driver all the time. And when Johnny started saying mercy, that's not even the way he said it, but it was mercy, mercy. And it was just so funny. We would just all break out in laughter, and that was cool. That was neat. That was fun.
I hesitate to ask this, but was there a worse part of the trip for you?
I think 8 hours from Chicago to Frankfurt was hard in the airplane.
Ditto. That was rough.
Getting there and getting back, that was bad.
Well, I would have thought I would have said climbing all the hills and the steps and the grades, but from Frankfurt back to Chicago, everything hurt, including where you sat. You know, that was rough.
The good old airplane. I have been in a lot of tight places. I've spent a lot of time in a lot tighter places. But this was putting 245 pounds of me into a 15-pound sack. And this was just absolutely ridiculous.
The plane trip back and forth, it was a long, grueling ride. If we'd had more room between the seats, it would have been much, much better. Of course, we didn't have it. We had to take what we got. But it was a long trip.
The airplane ride. Picture me between Don and this lady that was chaperoning those 29 children.
Yeah, I think the plane ride has to get it. Second for me was the next morning that we got out at Netanya. I suddenly cannot find any of my money, wallet, or anything in the room. And we had gone through everything. And Norma said, "What'd you say, Norma?" "Lord help us," or something, I don't know. But I picked up my shirt and it was all under my t-shirt. And we had gone through everything.
After this trip, what's your favorite airline? We'll start with Dean.
Southwest is the only way to fly.
Southwest.
I'll go along with Southwest.
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 Believe it or not, Southwest.
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 I think it's probably Southwest.
I'm in agreement with everyone, Southwest.
Okay, I think that's unanimous. Next question, and knowing that this may be edited, the question is, do you think that in spite of the trip over and the trip back, do you think that it was worth the money that you spent and the long time you spent traveling to get there? And we start back with Mick.
Yeah, I think it was worth the money and the time and everything else, the discomfort and whatever else we throw into it, because we did get to walk where Jesus walked. We did see the things that he saw. It was just a really neat experience for us to be. We felt like you were really part of it. As you study the Bible and your Sunday school lessons and so forth, you can relate back to these things. You can relate. I was there. I remember that. No, it's not exactly the same today as it was then, but I remember it. I was there, and yeah, it was well worth the money and the time.
I think it's definitely worth it. I mean, if there was definitely a way to get there faster, it would be beneficial, but the time and effort, it's worth it to see where Jesus walked.
Money never once entered my mind, so I was well pleased with the whole situation, even though it was rough.
It was definitely worth it, and I could not believe how fast the time went. I could not believe it was time to come home when we had to leave.
I think it's definitely worth it. I'm glad we did.
Well, I think absolutely it's worth it. It was very gratifying, and it was a whirlwind, and it was basically a physical challenge.
I think it was worth it, but I have thought, what would this trip be like without a guide? And our guide, Nurit, she did an excellent job, I thought, in bringing to light information of each place where we went.
I feel it was worth it. And one thing, what we saw, what we did, and everything was great. I mean, but there's one part of it that I really appreciate, and I feel like that I created friends that here, and I hope all of you feel the same way. I appreciate all of you very much, because most of you were total strangers until this trip, and now I feel like we're part of the family.
Yeah, you'll have to come down here to church now.
You have to spoil everything.
How long are you going to stay, Marvin?
I was very apprehensive in the beginning, but I'm glad I went, and it was definitely worth it. It was uplifting and very inspirational to me.
But it was a lifelong dream of Mick and I to go to the Holy Land, and it was everything we expected and more too. And the plane ride was grueling. Some of the places we had to go was very difficult. It was hard for me a lot of times because of my vision and my inability to know exactly where I'm stepping and stuff, and Nick had to deal with that and helping me so I didn't fall and break a leg or something. But when I got home and I thought about all the complaining I did about the airplane ride, it just hit me. Karen, Jesus Christ suffered so much more for you, and not because of anything he did, but because he loved you. And I complained about an airplane ride, and yeah, it's worth it.
Okay, Karen mentioned she had problems with her vision, but I can attest to the fact that it didn't stop her from dancing on a boat on the Sea of Galilee with some Jewish sailors. We have it on tape. And we read about the conflict in Jerusalem or in Israel between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Do you have a better understanding of that? Do you have more empathy because you've been there and you've seen some of it firsthand? And I guess, Dean, it's your turn to start.
I've seen it. I don't understand it. I cannot figure why, when you're up in the Wailing Wall there, the
Temple Mount.
Yeah, Temple Mount, of them up there throwing rocks over onto the people at the wall. It was just childish, if you ask me. It was just really, just didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it didn't make much sense to me. I don't understand why they can't get along.
It gives you a better understanding of where it's happening, but to understand it, I probably never will.
I think that, you hear about it on the news and you say a Palestinian, Israeli, whatever. I think when you're there and you suddenly realize that there's this pocket of Palestinians living in the middle of a pocket of Israelis, and part of these Israelis are Christian and part of them aren't, and that sort of thing, that it sort of gives you an idea that you understand that there's not going to be an easy way to get these people to seriously get along. And I think, like he was saying, the root cause is their religious belief, and they are extremely, extremely adamant about those beliefs. And, a part of me is like, well, maybe that's a good thing for them, whether I agree with them or not, to have that kind of faith. But then I think a part of me too is that, that you have to have some sort of reason somewhere along the line. And I just thought it was really sad that Marie could not go into Palestine with us and those sort of things, just because of those issues. I thought she was very gracious in her attitudes and understanding that, somehow it just has to be worked out. And, I think we can pray that maybe somehow they'll find a way to do that.
If the countries, the politicians could come together and with the same reason and understanding that our guide, Narit, and our bus driver, Johnny, they got along. They were from different religions. Johnny was a Christian Arab, and Marie was Jewish. And they worked together and did things together. They gave each other the respect and the understanding that they believed different things, but they still worked together, they still got along, they still discussed things or argued or whatever, but they still did their job and they gave each other respect and space. So if the countries could do that, then they could come together and find a peace. And that's what I told them, that my prayer for them would be that a peace could be reached that was acceptable to all the people.
I think like Don and Sally said, it helps us to be able to, when we talk about it on the news, to see in our minds where these things are going on. But again, like Diane just said, and what Karen said, to pray for peace, because their conflicts are something that have gone on for years and years and years, all the way back from Bible times. And when you have something that embedded, that's a hard thing, I think, for people to let go. And we saw our guide and our bus driver do that, but you've got a whole lot more involved there when you get the politicians into it and all. So it is a thing that I think we just need to pray for peace, and then you have to leave it in God's hands.
I see more clearly how vulnerable Israel is, and just walking around the streets and seeing how intermixed the Muslims and the Jewish people are, and how easy it is for a suicide bomber to walk in there and walk in a store or walk in a marketplace and set off a bomb.
Well, I make no pretense of understanding it. Saw it and still don't understand.